Yes, I'll tell you this one. This is called Blood is Thicker Than Water. Are you sitting comfortably? I do hope so. Pierre, are you ready for another story? Good. I'll just have a drink of water. Oh, that's very good. Right, Granny Grange will continue. Blood is thicker than water. Eddie Fowler was wondering what on earth he should do about his big brother. The problem was that Mike, who was 3 years older than Eddie's 9 years, was always in trouble with the big bullies of Henry Banks' gang at school. Mike seemed to be a magnet for the worst sort of boy or girl who enjoyed inflicting punishment on a timid, sensitive, intelligent young boy, and so endured many school playtimes being punched and taunted by the Banks gang. Eddie, Mike's younger brother, who was the complete opposite in build and temperament. In fact, he was strong, agile, fiery, and had been taken on by his boxing coach father, Eric Fowler, to be trained up at the local gym, and had recently been asked to join the international junior boxing team. Eric Fowler had been beside himself with pride when the letter informing Eddie of his success slipped through the Fowlers' family letterbox. He was a force to be reckoned with and loved every minute of his training. At his birthday last month, much to Eddie's delight, his parents had presented him with a pair of red leather boxing gloves, which he now used at regular training sessions with his father. Mike, on the other hand, was never interested in boxing, enjoying instead a good adventure book or playing his beloved violin, something he had learnt to play from a very early age, and was now moving up the grades and becoming almost virtuoso, much to his strict, highly qualified music teacher, Mrs. McRoy's great pleasure and satisfaction. "That boy is an absolute natural," she would comment to her patient, relaxed attitude husband Ralph, who had become used to a variety of children coming in and out of his house, playing different instruments of differing types and varying greatly in standard. He had adopted a strategy of headphones and radio, which eased the situation when students of music were in the early stages of learning and not making a very pleasant sound. Eddie was wondering what to do with the Henry Banks gang, who yesterday, he had heard this through the playground grapevine, had overreached themselves in their cruelty to Mike, giving him a bloodied nose, thus causing Eddie's fiery temper to overspill and his feeling of injustice to be overwhelming. What to do? Yesterday, Mike had been cornered by the gang in the playground, by now known as an easy target. He had tried to defend himself as the gang leader, cruel Henry Banks, kicked him in the shins and shouted such abuse as, "Caddy Custard, you big girl's blouse, come on, hit me." "I don't want to fight," said Mike in a frightened voice. Henry Banks continued to kick him, and even Mike's cries of stop it, you are hurting me," did nothing to stop the arrogant, wicked gang leader. Eventually the dinner lady, Ursula Meldrew, stopped the fighting with Henry Banks, telling a complete whopper of a lie. "He started it, miss." "I think that very unlikely, young man. Now go to your classroom," said Mrs. Meldrew, shaking her head in despair. Some of the pupils at the school needed a jolly good lesson to make them behave themselves, she thought, but she knew this was not a possibility. Word had got back to Eddie about the playground session and how little respected his brother Mike was by the Henry Banks gang. "They are so awful, and my brother does not deserve this sort of treatment from boys who are ignorant, wicked, and an absolute misery to be around. I have got to do something," Eddie thought to himself. "Something that will make sure Mike will never be bullied again by the Henry Banks gang." During the night, Eddie was tossing and turning, thinking and wondering what to do, when suddenly a plan began to form in his mind and a strategy was set. "Yes," thought Eddie, "that should sort things out nicely. They will never bother my brother again." It all happened like this. Mike was feeling particularly chirpy this Wednesday morning, a school day. He had a few days ago rescued a 4-week-old black and white kitten that had been dumped in a carrier bag and left in a shopping trolley outside the local supermarket. The tiny meowing had led Mike to the pathetic specimen trapped inside a hot plastic bag. Having retrieved the kitten and pleaded with his mother, a jolly, slightly overweight, patient lady, very indulgent towards her sons, she had finally agreed into giving the kitten a home. A happy Mike took the newly named Boris home to the Fowler household, another mouth to feed, but adored by Mike, who looked up on Google how to look after a kitten and insisted on feeding and playing with him as soon as he came home from school. Such a soft-hearted boy who loved animals. Mike went to school feeling for once happy on this fateful day. He had fed Boris the kitten with special kitten milk, teased him with a stuffed toy mouse, and left with Eddie for school. Eddie had a plan, and today was the day he wanted to put it into effect. He loved his elder brother, although he would never tell him, and he was prepared to defend him come what may, under any circumstances. Brothers were brothers, and blood is thicker than water, meaning you will always have your family, but you might not always have your friends. This is how Eddie felt. Mike and Eddie went off to their various classes. Eddie was in the junior school and Mike was in the senior school, so they did not share the same playground. In Eddie's playground he was king. No one wanted to take Eddie on in a fight, as they knew he was a boxer and would get the worst of it. No one had the stupidity to even try. Eddie did not particularly want to fight, but if there was someone to be defended, particularly an underdog or a friend who was being treated unfairly by one of the other boys, Eddie would be the first to step in and try and sort it out. Just the threat of Eddie being called in was enough to make the bullies back off. The lunchtime bell rang out, much to some pupils' relief, who were in lessons they did not like. For instance, Mike was doing a PE lesson of gymnastics, which he loathed, as he had a thin, bony body, which the other, bigger, more muscly boys teased him unmercifully about. Dinner was served in the big school hall under the eagle eye of very strict supervisor Mavis Hawkins, who stood no nonsense from any of the pupils. Absolutely no throwing of food. Brussels sprouts, which had been a previous school favourite for food fights, were a complete no-no. At 1:15 precisely, another bell rang, and it was tipping out time in the playground for all the pupils until 1:45 p.m. Mike hated this time, as generally this was when he was picked upon by the bully gang of Henry Banks. Feeling happy about his little kitten Boris, who he had rescued, Mike sincerely hoped that today Henry Banks would leave him alone. Mike walked slowly out into the playground and decided to sit in the corner by the 100-year-old oak tree, a fixture in the playground, never to be cut down because of its historic age. He did not want to be particularly noted except for his best friend George Daventry, a little ginger-haired boy from Northern Ireland with a cheeky grin and a repertoire of Irish jokes that seemed endless, and what is more, he could deliver them one after the other like a bullet from a gun. The two boys were discussing the latest national football results when, to their dismay, Henry Banks arrived with 4 other jeering bullies under the influence of wicked Henry. They started on Ginge to his friends by making fun of his red hair. Mike instantly went to his friend's defence, knowing he was in for a bit of a pounding and was just about to receive a punch on the nose from arrogant Henry when a voice shouted out from behind, "Stop that, you fat, spineless bully, Henry Banks. You are not liked or wanted around here." Henry stopped in his tracks, hardly believing that anyone would have the nerve to stand up to him. In fact, completely taken aback. Mike, who by now was looking grey-faced as he had been prepared to accept a kicking from the gang, looked around in complete surprise to see his young brother Eddie standing there, defiant, angry and magnificent. Eddie, with 3 of his trusted friends, had ventured off limits and climbed into the seniors' playground to defend his big brother after he had received word that Henry Banks' gang were going to have another go at intimidating Mike and Ginge, both small in stature, easy prey for the bully boys. "What can you do to us, you little whippersnappers?" jeered Henry Banks, coming towards Eddie in a menacing way. Come on," muttered Eddie under his breath. "Just get within reach of my left hook," a boxing move taught to him by his father, but told only to use in the boxing ring. However, Eddie believed that the situation required that he stand up not only for himself, but his big brother and others whose lives had been made a misery by the Banks gang. Nearer and nearer, and suddenly Henry Banks was on the floor, his nose blooded, head spilling, yelling out, Don't hit me any more!" Eddie, now sitting on top of the cowed gang leader, shouted to him, "It's not so funny taking some of your own medicine, is it, Henry Banks? You are the coward, not my brother, and if I ever hear of you hitting him or his friends again, you will have me to deal with. Be warned." Henry Banks, as is usual with most bullies, was very frightened and could not believe he had been bettered by a 9-year-old. The rest of his gang, seeing him as just a stupid bully, decided not to belong to his gang anymore, and instead asked if Mike and Ginge would be forming a gang they could belong to, especially if Eddie was to be part of it. What a turn of events! Sometimes it is very necessary to stand up and be counted and do something to help another person, particularly if it is your brother, thought Eddie, as he rounded up his other 3 friends and slipped back into his own playground. Mike and Ginge were left smiling with relief as they felt there would be no more bullying in the playground thanks to his young, brave brother, who did not like to fight outside the boxing ring, but whose loyalty to his brother had overtaken his fighting code. Harsh as the punishment had to be for Henry Banks and followers, who were hard nuts to crack, Eddie had achieved it by a show of strength when it was needed. That evening in the Fowler household there was an air of celebration. Mike could not keep a grin from spreading all over his face, and Eddie, who felt really pleased with himself, was whistling his favourite tune from Westcliff. Mary Fowler, the boy's mother, could not understand why her two boys were in such good spirits. She loved seeing them both happy and friendly instead of the usual teasing and horse-playing around. "What has got into you both this evening? You boys are both acting as if you had won a prize or something." "Oh no," said Eddie. "We just had a few things right in the playground today, that's all," and burst out laughing, thinking of the bully who turned out to be a lump of jelly when confronted and stood up to. Mike, on the other hand, was as happy as a sandboy, mainly due to his younger brother Eddie, who had come to his rescue. Finally, he would be able to play in the playground without fear of interference from the bully gang, and even had followers now in respect from other pupils. Mike turned to Eddie and said, "Thanks, bruv. You saved the day for me. I owe you." "OK then," said Eddie cheekily. "You'll have to pay me protection money in future." Mike's face dropped. "Only joking," said Eddie in fits of laughter. "After all, brothers should stick together and look after one another," he declared. As the boys grew up, they always remained firm friends. There were times when they disagreed, had differences of opinions, but underlying was their respect for each other's individual talents and qualities, emphasising the fact that blood is thicker than water. How very true that is. Well, what other one can I do? I think a little story, a little light story. Yes, I think this one will be quite nice. This story is called Animal Tales from the Magical Forest Danden. Now, the Forest Danden is situated in Normandy in France, and it's 30 miles of the most beautiful countryside and forest. And you can see deer skipping through the forest sometimes, and you can see other animals, birds, just delightful. And of course there's little hedgehogs and rabbits and all sorts of other animals enjoying their forest life. So here we are, we have a tale from the magical forest Danden. Sit up properly, Pierre. Sit. Harry Hedgehog twitched his ear and then fell back to sleep in his snug leaf-covered bed under the old oak tree in the beautiful and magical forest Danden. His ear twitched again and woke him. Angry at being woken when he wanted to sleep, Harry shouted out, "What is it that keeps touching my ear and making it twitch?" He looked around him and found Woody, the cheeky mole, touching his ear with a twig, grinning all over his face. "I just wanted to see how long it would take you to wake up," said Woody, much amused by the angry reaction of his friend Harry Hedgehog. "Well, now you know. If you do it again, Woody, I will roll you over and prickle you until you stop your nonsense," said a disgruntled Harry. This was not an idle threat. As you know, dear reader, hedgehogs have very prickly backs and are best not touched, or a splinter or two might be picked up. Woody, who had had experience of Harry's prickles, was mindful of this. Harry decided to have another go at going to sleep and rolled up into a ball and fell into a deep sleep. Woody Mole was not to be put off. He wanted to have fun, and what is more, he wanted to have fun with his friend Harry Hedgehog. Again, Woody tickled Harry's ear. This time Harry was furious and called out in a loud voice, "You have done it again, Woody. I'm going to spike you." Harry started to move towards Woody in a menacing manner, but Woody was far too quick for him and darted behind the old oak tree. "Come here, Woody. I'm going to spike you for being so annoying," answered Harry again. Woody laughed and laughed. "Come on, Harry. I was only waking you so that we could go and have some fun together." At the thought of having some fun with his friend Woody Mole, Harry Hedgehog calmed down and excitedly said, "All right, Woody, I forgive you. What had you in mind?" "Well," said Woody, "how about going down to Warty Water Rat? You know Harry likes company, and we could try some fishing to see if we could catch something for tea." "What a good idea," said Harry, especially thinking of his hungry tummy, as Warty Water Rat made the most delicious cockroach barbecue with minced salt, sauce and fried ants, his speciality. The two forest friends found the woodland path littered with pretty yellow primroses and bluebells, heralding the dawn of springtime. This path led to the riverside and Warty Rat's residence. Come on, Harry," said an impatient Woody Mole. "Walk a bit faster. I can smell Warty's barbecue from here, and it smells really yummy." With the anticipation of food, Harry Hedgehog began to walk faster, and the two arrived at the riverside home of Warty, a barbecue smoking away outside his tiny wooden house, flower boxes on the windowsills put there by Mrs. Warty, a very precise, pretty, pleasant water rat who Warty adored. "Hello, Warty. Hello, Mrs. Warty. We smelt your barbecue and thought you might have something succulent cooking." "Welcome, welcome," said a kindly, hospitable Warty Water Rat. "There is plenty on the barbecue for you both. Mrs. Warty, fetch my friend some plates." Mrs. Warty duly fetched the plates, a blue and white plate striped for Harry and a green and white flowered plate for Woody. "Pull up a stool," said a pleased Warty, who always enjoyed friends calling around. "I've just brewed some beech leaf cider. I've really surpassed myself with this brew, so come and fill up your glasses." Both Harry Hedgehog and Woody Mole were full to bursting. Such was the generous hospitality of Warty and Mrs. Water Rat. Warty then had a brilliant idea, which was just what Harry and Woody had been hoping for. "I'll go to the shed and find 3 fishing rods. Come on, my friends. Let's go downstream and do a bit of fishing." Mrs. Warty began to tidy up the table where they had eaten the barbecue and drunk the cider, and then bustled inside the house, ready to carry on some more cleaning and cooking, her favourite pastime. The 3 friends found a tiny clearing by the riverside where they set up their fishing rods, all of which had bells on, so if there were any bites on their fishing hooks, they could be alerted and haul the catch in. Fishing chairs were assembled, made out of branches from a chestnut tree, lashed together with ivy. Fishing umbrellas were put up, made from large rhubarb leaves, and Warty, who had thought of everything, produced some beech leaf cider, which they drank while lazing back in their chairs, chatting about life in the forest and the latest scandal of Donald Deer, who had raided the vegetable garden of Buster the wild boar. Buster's garden, lovingly cultivated, contained a fine array of cabbage and carrots, spinach and turnips, produced for his family's consumption. Buster Boar had been very upset and angry to find his own garden raided and stripped bare of any vegetable produce. Donald Deer was on the wanted list, and all the forest animals were on the lookout for Donald to bring him to justice. If found, he would be put before the very strict but fair Judge Oliver Owl, who was also warden of the forest, responsible for good animal behaviour, and a very wise old tawny owl who knew absolutely everything about all the animals of the forest Dandane. Judge Oliver Owl always gave out punishments to fit the crime, and very often was given a standing ovation by the jury of 12 different forest animals and insects. For example, Eric Eagle, Polly Partridge, Willy Worm, to name but a few. Suddenly there was a clanging of the fishing rod bells, and the three friends were astonished to see their rods being torn from the water, and a large furry-looking beaver with an attitude problem, dripping in water, was headed towards the three in a very menacing way. "How dare you put your fishing rods in my section of the river, taking all my river food?" shrieked Bertie Beaver, now in a very bad mood. Warty Water Rat was the brave one of the three friends, and stood as tall as he could make himself, while Harry and Woody hid behind him, trembling from top to toe with fear. "Now look here, Bertie, I've been fishing here for years. Why should we move now just because you have come to live downstream? Surely there's room for both of us," said Warty, trying to be diplomatic and calm down the situation. He most certainly did not want to fight Bertie Beaver. "Come on, Bertie," said Water, trying to be amiable. "Have a mug of my beech leaf cider and let's be friends. I'm sure we can work something out which will suit all of us." Very diplomatic. Bertie Beaver, although looking so aggressive on the outside, was in fact as soft as marshmallow on the inside, and he said he would very much like to try the excellent-looking brew. After a couple of mugs of beech leaf cider, Bertie was feeling in a very good mood, and the danger had been averted. The four forest animals discussed the pros and cons of various fishing places along the river bank, and finally came up with a compromise, so that all parties were happy with the outcome. The four forest animals, Warty Water Rat, Woody Mole, Bertie Beaver and Harry Hedgehog, from that day on became the best of friends, and were often seen along the river bank, sitting in their fishing chairs, sharing a mug or two of Warty's special brew, their fishing rods propped precariously on a branch over the dark green, fast-flowing water, the bells quietly dinging away, putting off any would-be catch. After what turned out to be a very enjoyable day with his friends in the forest, Harry Hedgehog returned to his comfortable, snug bed under the old oak tree, uttered a contented sigh, twitched his ear, smiled as he looked out to see the plants and leaves and the emerging new forest life as springtime approached in his lovely forest dandane. "I'm a lucky chap," thought Harry, as he curled up in a ball and fell into a contented sleep. Well, I must go and have a sleep myself, because I do believe it's bedtime. So I hope all you children will wash your teeth, because you know that you must wash your teeth night and morning, and have a lovely night's sleep, and I shall see you tomorrow. I wish you a very good night. Well, this is night time, and Granny Grange is going to tell you a story about a ghost. Sit down and be comfortable, and I'll start. Tobias the Reluctant Ghost. 3 cod and chips and 1 sausage and chips, shouted Sandra, the blonde-haired waitress, to the sweaty, overworked cook, Giovanni, as she walked swiftly towards the next table of 4 teenage boys and a teenage girl called Susan, who were lively and misbehaving. "Could you calm down and give me your orders, please? There are other customers waiting to be served," Sandra said sternly. The fish restaurant, called The Lazy Fish,
was very popular with local townsfolk in Whitstable. Most nights all the 8 tables were full several times during the evening, and Sandra, the only waitress, had her work cut out, getting round the tables to collect the orders. The restaurant was housed in an old railway booking office that had once served to give tickets out to the townsfolk wanting to take the steam train to London during the turn of the century. The line had closed long ago, and some years later had been transformed into the local fish restaurant. There was a rumour that the ghost of a boy appeared every so often, dressed in peculiar clothes, but only to children. Of course, the grown-ups never believed such stories. The owners of the Lazy Fish were an Italian couple called Giovanni and Maria Macaroni, who thought any ghost stories were a figment of people's imaginations, and definitely did not believe in ghost rumours surrounding the Lazy Fish. They were a jolly couple, had employed Sandra, who lived locally, to wait on the tables, and who took no nonsense from the customers. Sandra had 2 children, Martha 9 and Ethan 11 years old, and she and her husband Martin occasionally visited the restaurant for fish and chips as a special treat. Something unusual happened that can only be described as odd. Sandra had decided that her family should come in for their fish and chip supper treat much later than usual, as Mr. and Mrs. Macaroni wanted some extra help on this Friday night, cutting up potatoes for the next day's chips. Sandra offered the help of Martha and Ethan, as there was no school the next day, and the children were delighted to be of help and to earn a little extra pocket money. Well, after all the customers had left, Martha and Ethan were left in the kitchen, the old train booking office, with a bowl of water and a large pile of potatoes to peel before their mother and father came in to cut the potatoes up into chips, as the usual much-used chipping machine had broken down. Ethan said to Martha, scraping the peel off the potatoes, "I don't think I would like to do this as a job when I grow up. Would you, Martha?" "No, I wouldn't. I hate scraping these potatoes," said Martha in a moany voice. "And there is such a pile of potatoes to do, it will take us ages." "Never mind," said Ethan. "We're helping Mum, and that's all that matters." As they were sitting chatting, they noticed another young boy in the room. He looked rather different in that he was wearing clothes from a past age, a navy peak cap and a sort of navy uniform which looked very smart but old-fashioned, and a very prominent badge which said "Station Porter, Whitstable Station." "Who are you?" said Ethan. "I'm Tobias," said the boy. "I have just finished work for the day. Would you like some help?" "Yes, please," said Ethan, thinking that any help getting the pile of potatoes down would be good. Tobias sat on a spare stool round the table and started scraping the potatoes at quite a speed. "Have you done this before?" said Martha, admiration showing in her face. Well, yes, I have," said Tobias. I used to help in the station cafe when the ladies in their long skirts and the gentlemen with their tops hats used to want refreshments before they departed on the steam train to London. Now I have been promoted and carry ladies' and gentlemen's luggage to the carriages pulled by my favourite steam engines." "But that was years ago," said a surprised Ethan. Tobias just laughed mysteriously. The pile of potatoes were finished, and suddenly Tobias said, "Nice to meet you. Hope we can meet again. Got to go." And without more ado, he walked through the door and disappeared. Ethan and Martha could not believe their eyes. Ethan stuttered and could hardly get his words out to exclaim to his sister, did you see that? Tobias just walked through the door." "Yes," said Martha, "I'm frightened. Do you think he was a ghost?" I don't know," said Ethan. "Something is not quite right here." This is quite frightening, isn't it? As soon as their mother, Sandra, and Father Martin came to find the children and to cut up the potatoes into chips, the two blurted out their experience with the boy Tobias. Sandra could not explain it. What a mystery! And promised to ask Mr. and Mrs. Marconi when she saw them next day if they knew anything about the unusual boy. For several days and nights Martha and Ethan could not get the incident with Tobias out of their minds. Who was this strange boy, and how had he walked right through the restaurant's kitchen door? They talked for hours about their strange experience, and when their mother said that Mr. and Mrs. Macaroni wanted their help the following Friday night, they were both pleased and apprehensive about the possibility of meeting the strange Tobias again. When asked by Sandra about the possibility of a strange boy in their fish restaurant, Mr. and Mrs. Macaroni had looked decidedly uneasy and refused to comment. Friday night arrived, and the family had a lovely, tasty supper of cod and chips and mushy peas. Nothing was left on the plates, not even a tiny piece of fish for Felix, their family cat, who usually had a little treat wrapped up carefully in a spare serviette by Martha, who idolized Felix, and Felix in return loved Martha unconditionally and always slept on her bed every night. Supper over, Martha and Ethan reported to the kitchen, where a huge pile of potatoes ready to be scraped were waiting for them on the table. The pair both put on white kitchen aprons and started the chore. Suddenly they were aware of another person in the room. It was Tobias, with a cheeky grin on his face. "Want some help again?" he said cheekily. "Yes, please," said Ethan. "But first we want to ask you a few questions. We saw you walk through the kitchen door. Are you a ghost?" "Who are you?" said Ethan, very hesitantly, as he did not want to upset Tobias. "Oh, that's easy to explain," said Tobias. "Yes, I am a ghost," said Tobias. A gasp of shock came from Ethan and Martha. "Don't worry, I'm a friendly ghost. In fact, I don't want to be a ghost any more. I want to go up to the star that I have been allocated to start being a trainee engineer driver. But I'm trapped down here on Earth in a bygone age to continue being a station porter, but sometimes I am able to appear to children of this time. And if I can find a true and faithful friend with a lot of courage, then, with their help, if they really believe in me, I can fly up to my destiny in the sky and be what I have always wanted to be, a steam engine driver." Tobias spoke in a slow, defiant voice. "So far I have not come across anyone that wants to be my true and faithful friend. They are all too scared of me," said Tobias sadly. "Oh well, let's not think of sad things. Come on, we have potatoes to scrape." Tobias, Martha and Ethan started to take potatoes from the pile, scraping them whilst chatting and laughing, with Tobias, who was very entertaining. He told them of his job as a station porter. He said in his day lads of 11 years or even younger had to go to work to earn money for the large families, and his father had managed to get him a job as a station porter at Whitstable, under the charge of Mr. Wimple, the chief station master, a very strict and punctual man. He said that one day he had an accident whilst walking across the railway line to pick up a handbag that one of the posh ladies had dropped over the side of the platform. A fast steam train had come along unexpectedly, and the next thing Tobias knew, he was up in the sky looking down on the world. But because of the way he had died, his spirit had stayed on earth, and there he was, still working on Whitstable Station, until he could find a true and courageous friend. This made Ethan think very hard. Could he be that important friend that Tobias was looking for? He searched his heart and felt sorry for this reluctant ghost. Of course I could. Whatever has happened to Tobias, I can help him to get to his star, thought Ethan. As the trio were chatting, after the sterling work peeling the potatoes, Ethan had an idea. Tobias, before you disappear tonight, why don't you come back next Friday night, and I will arrange to be here, because I think I could be your true, faithful and courageous friend, and set you free to fly to your star. Tobias looked totally amazed and delighted. Oh, Ethan, I knew you would be a special friend, because I have been looking at you every time you have been to the Lazy Fish. That is why I have come to you, to see if we could... Oh, this is so interesting. To see if we could be special friends. And we can. Suddenly Tobias was gone, walking straight through the kitchen door, but this time with a cheeky wave. The following Friday arrived quicker than Ethan had expected, and as luck would have it, Sandra, their mother, wanted their help again in the kitchen, scraping potatoes, probably for the last time, as Mr. and Mrs. Macaroni had invested in a new chip-cutting machine, but also in a machine that scraped potatoes. Martha did not want to miss out at the meeting of Ethan and Tobias, and sure enough, when they started their work, in came Tobias with a big smile on his face. "Yes," said Ethan, "I am your loyal and faithful friend, and I want you to go to the star in the sky now, so that you can start doing the job you have always wanted to do. It is a starlit night tonight, a little bit frosty, and there are so many stars to choose from, Tobias. Which one do you fancy?" asked Ethan. Martha, Ethan and Tobias stood outside the Fish restaurant, staring up at the star-filled sky, and the moon was visible in the north of the sky. "That one," said Tobias. "That one, that is shining brighter than the others in the west. That is the star that I have been allocated." "Well," said Ethan, "off you go, my new friend. I shall be thinking of you driving those steam engines in the sky." Martha looked at Tobias and said, "I am your true and faithful friend too, and I want you to fly up to your chosen star and be happy forever." With that, Tobias started floating upwards, further and further, until he was a tiny speck. As the two, brother and sister, watched, they saw the speck turn into a little light that floated through the sky and landed on the bright chosen star in the west. Tobias had arrived at his destination and would not be a ghost on earth any more. Hand in hand, Martha and Ethan returned to the kitchen, a little sad that they would not see their new ghost friend Tobias any more, but triumphant that they had helped a lost spirit ghost friend find his destination. What an unusual experience they had shared together. They were not believed by their mother and father, but how true do you think this was? Was it just imagination? The only thing I can say is that when Ethan was wistfully looking round the kitchen before going home, he noticed a Whitstable porter's badge laying beside the cutting board on the Lazy Fish restaurant's kitchen table. Well, it's us to think and wonder about. Good night, children.
Here I am again, Granny Grange. Now I think I'm going to wear my hat to tell you this story, because this story is about India, where it's so warm. So here I am putting my hat on to read this story. And here is Pierre, my lucky rabbit, who wants to listen too. So, here is the story. And it's called When Fate Takes a Hand. The only wealth is life itself. That's a quote from Ruskin. And I'm looking out the window and my black cat Bonaparte is trying to get in again to listen to this story. We'll see. When Fate Takes a Hand. Arnaud Didier had sweat pouring out of every pore of his body. It was afternoon in Bombay, now called Mumbai, India. The air conditioning had completely malfunctioned, so that lying on his cotton-sheeted bed in a luxury apartment, Arnaud felt very uncomfortable. The engineering job he had come out to Mumbai to direct was going well. Arnaud worked for an international pharmaceutical company who had decided to build a high-tech plant in India where the labour was cheap to hire. It was a 5-year contract and was 2 years into the stressful work. Arnaud found the heat quite fatiguing and often thought about the green and pleasant fields of Normandy and his lovely oak-beamed French farmhouse with rambling gardens and paddocks being looked after by his son Eric and daughter-in-law Florence. It was Arnaud's afternoon off, a time he relished as he was able to catch up on his reading, meet a friend or two, pick up a meal at the local curry house, and just have time out from the busy job, which he found rather relentless at times, but at other times very satisfying, as he was project managing the new plant and could put some of his ideas into the new enterprise. On this particular afternoon off, Arnaud lay listlessly on the bed pondering about life. His wife of 20 years had sadly died in a car accident 3 years earlier. After the first flush of marriage, they had lived virtually separate lives. Sandrine, his wife, had not liked travelling, so had stayed in Normandy, while Arnaud had been all over the world project managing. They had 2 grown-up sons who were gainfully employed, one in the diplomatic service and the other one a qualified chemist. Arnaud felt he needed another challenge in life, not just work. As he sat in his large green velvet-covered reading armchair, wondering what life had in store for him, he could hear the child beggars calling for donations to their pitifully poor families. Arnaud had found the beggars in the street very distressing. Suddenly, an idea flashed through his mind. Would it be possible to make a difference to one of the beggar children? What if he could reverse fate and stop one of the many street beggars from getting into a life of begging and crime just to survive? Could he do it? Life was not always about making money, greedy money in some cases, but finding some way of giving back to society, making a difference, and perhaps even helping to make a better future. These were the thoughts engaging Arnaud's mind. Arnaud showered, dressed, and went out into the hot, sweaty streets of Mumbai. Everywhere was buzzing with activity, teeming with humanity, motorbikes piled high with produce and boxes, cars, buses honking their way through overcrowded streets. But what struck Arno as he walked along the heaving side streets, being jostled and pushed, was the large cross-section of human poverty in the form of beggars of all ages, particularly children of a very small age, pleading for money to help feed their large families. One small black-haired boy with a stubborn look caught Arno's attention. He had a small red, well-used, scratched plastic bucket and a wholly muddy sponge. He had positioned himself at the traffic lights on a busy crossroads, so that as soon as the lights turned to red, he would dart out and start cleaning the windscreen of the first car, demanding a rupee for the privilege of having a smeary windscreen wipe. As he was so small, the boy had to climb onto the bonnet of the chosen car to reach the windscreen. Arno was struck by the sheer audacity of the child, of perhaps 9 years old, in raggedy clothes, with dark brown piercing eyes and a cheeky grin. Arno stood about 10 minutes watching the boy and admired his tenacity, even when some car drivers rejected his efforts and told him to clear off and get out of the way. Yes. Following his earlier resolve, Arno decided if he wanted to make a difference to some child's life, might it not be this scrap of humanity, probably an orphan, living on the streets of Mumbai, night and day, relying on his wits to earn enough money to survive? Arno pondered about how he should go about his plan, now but materialising into this particular streetwise child off the streets and adopting him, giving him an education and so transforming his life. A very philanthropic plan, he thought, the most challenging project he had ever attempted, which made it more appealing. What would his 2 sons think of his resolve to help a poor beggar boy? He hoped they would back his plan. Arno decided to walk back to his apartment and consider a course of action. He felt happy and had a spring in his step as, at last, he had a project to help someone's life, not just project managing commercial business. He decided when he finished work the next day that he would engage the small, energetic, enterprising boy in conversation. Arno had learnt the local language during his time in India, which was a definite advantage. After he had had a hard day sorting out engineering problems in the new pharmaceutical factory, he had an aperitif in his local Indian bar with onion bhaji nibbles and then set out to find the boy. Arno searched the streets where he had seen the unwashed, scantily torn-clothed boy, but he was nowhere to be seen. He gave up and went the next day. Still the boy had not put in an appearance and seemed to have completely disappeared. After 3 days, Arno spied the boy again, cleaning windscreens with his heavily used bucket and sponge, the water looking even muddier than before. "Hello, young man," said Arno in a kind, friendly voice. "What is your name?" "Who wants to know?" said a suspicious Punji. You see, dear reader, there were many dangers on the streets of Mumbai, particularly for young, vulnerable boys and girls. Some were taken off by the criminal gangs and forced into lives of endless hardship and crime, whilst others were taken for slavery in some large houses or businesses. This was the reason that Punji was very cautious with his interrogator Arno. Where do you live?" inquired Arno, anxious to get the boy's confidence. I live on platform 1. "Under the staircase in the terminus station," said Punji, pointing across the road at the same time trying to give an air of importance to his obvious live-on-the-street address. Arno looked across the road and was surprised to see the Victoria Terminus railway station, constructed in 1887 to commemorate the Golden Jubilee of Queen Victoria, Empress of India, although she never visited India. To the large, imposing Victorian Gothic Revival-style building, the terminus station serving both long-distance trains and commuter trains of the Mumbai Suburban Railway, with the beautiful Rajabai clock still hand-wound, rising absurdly elegant against the backdrop of poverty on the streets surrounding it. This building was a magnificent legacy to past times when the British Empire controlled the country. "How long have you lived there?" asked an intrigued Arno, now warming to the boy, which was mutual, as Punji indeed found confidence in this kind stranger's approach, and somehow thought that he was not a threat, but wanted to help him. I've lived there for over a year. I just can't stay with my uncle any longer, as he used to beat me, and there was never any food to eat, so I ended up searching through rubbish bins or stealing food from the street vendors, just to stay alive." Punji was near to sobbing as he explained his great efforts to keep going. I eventually ran away from my uncle's household and arrived by train at Victoria Station. Made a friend on the journey who told me about the accommodation on platform 1. I found a few rags and made a bed up there and have stayed. I found this old bucket and sponge and started my business of cleaning windscreens of cars. This gives me enough money to eat, and I give some money to one of the station porters who lets me have water from the station tap to fill my bucket every day. I make a lot of money, you know," said Punji, now trying to impress Arno. "What happened to your parents?" said Arno, now really wanting to get to know Punji's background. "Oh, they both died from a disease, cholera, I believe. We lived in such crowded slums outside Mumbai. You see, we lived in a one-room shelter with walls made of tin corrugated iron and had no money to live on, really, apart from the begging. I was very lucky to survive and was sent to live with my uncle, who already had 7 children and very little money," said Punji dolefully. What a dreadful start to life, thought Arno. Arno and Punji talked for a long time, and Arno promised he would return the next day to talk to him again. So it was, a firm friendship was established between Arno and Punji, from exchanges of conversation about Punji's life as a street beggar, the difficulties of getting work, and above all, the feeling of not belonging to anyone, sleeping rough on Victoria Station. Arno admired the pluck and determination of this little Indian boy. He could have given up under such a tough deal that life had given him, but no. Punji was a fighter, full of optimism in the face of such hardship. Arno could not keep a smile from creeping over his face when Punji boasted gleefully of the possibility of a new job, shoe shining on the main concourse of Victoria Station, being arranged by his bedfellow friends from under the staircase on platform 1. It was final decision time. Yes, thought Arno, this was the boy that he wanted to help, and spent many restless nights wondering how he should go about his task of rescuing this little scrap of humanity, who refused to be worn down by his situation and sparkled like an undiscovered jewel waiting to be found. Arno had another 2 years of contract to do in India, so he decided he would initially sponsor Punji, and because he was so bright and curious about life, Arno determined to send him to school in Bombay. Mumbai, near to his pharmaceutical project, and invite him into his home to stay permanently if things worked out well. Yes, that was the way forward. He would have to go through various authorities to carry out his plan, speak to the uncle and get his permission, which was eventually given, and then papers drawn up for sponsorship with a view to adoption if Ponji wanted to join the family. Over a period of weeks, Arno and Punji enjoyed each other's company. Arno, a father figure to Punji, who had never had anyone take so much interest in him and take time to explain such interesting things about life. This is how fate took a hand and changed Punji's life. Arno arranged for him to come and live in his apartment, and his housekeeper Miriam, a local lady with portly appearance and colourful saris to match her personality, was told to look after Ponji, feed and launder his clothes. She took an instant liking to the little boy, with no caring family, and began to mother him, baking him delicious biscuits and taking him to the local markets to choose food that he wanted to eat. The first day that Ponji arrived at Arno's apartment, he was filled with wonderment. He'd never seen anything so luxurious in all his life. It was nothing short of Ponji's idea of what a palace might be. His face showed the amazement and delight at such luxury he had only ever dreamed about or seen displayed in the shop windows on television screens. Here he was, afraid to touch anything in case he broke it. Beautiful vases, Persian carpets, damask curtains. Arno, witnessing such honest emotions of a young beggar boy, made him realise that all the hard work of getting the enormous amount of paperwork completed in order that he could look after Ponji was very well worth it. Ponji could not get used to the running water from the taps that he did not have to share with hundreds of other people. In fact, the first night there was a comfortable bed with cotton sheets set up for Ponji in one of the spacious apartment rooms with air conditioning. And when Arno went to check on him just after midnight, he found Ponji curled up in a ball wrapped in the cover from the bed, but actually sleeping soundly under the bed. It took him several days to get used to sleeping in a permanent bed. Ponji's first day at school, dressed in a smart clothes, bag, pencil and paper provided by Arno, was a difficult day as he stood timidly at the school door. Fortunately, the head of the school, Dr. Andrews, a white-haired, bespectacled, scholarly-looking man, saw Ponji and shook his hand, inviting him to join his class and encouraging him not to be nervous, as there was another boy joining the school at the same time, Matthew Stevenson, a little English boy of the same age, 9 years old, similarly nervous, whose father had come from England to work on the pharmaceutical project in the same building as Arno. What a coincidence! Ponji's sponsor. Immediately a friendship was formed between Ponji and Matthew. Ponji found the discipline of the school quite difficult. Rules to be followed, special times for food and drink. Being a bright and naturally cheerful little boy, he soon adjusted to his new life and became one of the best pupils, enjoying all the lessons and those subjects he had difficulty in, for instance mathematics. His determination and advice from Arno to break things down into small sections and understand them thoroughly before going on to learn different principles of mathematics, and not to be shy about putting his hand up in class if he did not comprehend something he found very useful. Building blocks. Always remember building blocks. You understand one small thing, then you add it to the next. Arno used to say to Punji when he would come home from school sad and dispirited because he had received a bad mark in maths and the other children were all in front of him. Arno on other occasions would say, "Just remember, Punji, we cannot all be good at every subject. You love music and are outstanding at that. You enjoy reading and are good at that. So it just means in subjects you find difficulty, you just have to be patient and learn bit by bit and be determined and don't be afraid to ask Mr. Partridge, the maths teacher, if something is puzzling you. I say again, building blocks, building blocks." With Arno's advice taken to heart, Punji managed to cope with all the subjects, even the ones he found difficult. Arno's contract finished after 2 years, and he returned to his beloved France, to his oak-beamed rambling farmhouse in Normandy, with his protégé Punji. Punji loved the country immediately and began to feel happy and loved as part of a larger family. To Arno's great delight, his sons, with their families, accepted and welcomed Punji with open arms. The Little Beggar India boy, now transformed into an eager-to-learn schoolboy, blossomed and flourished in such an encouraging environment. He finished his education and went to university in Paris, studying engineering, eventually getting his first-class degree specialising in automobile research into solar-powered cars. As well as learning grammatical English, he had to learn French and found that he had a natural talent for languages. Matthew Stevenson was very impressed with his command of languages when they met up from time to time to exchange experiences of being in business, Matthew graduating in science and technology and securing a job in the study of molecular atoms at Edinburgh University. So it was that fate had a way of completely transforming the life of a little Indian boy of Mumbai, who finally finished up as Dr. Punjay Didier. That is the stories. If you keep trying, you will succeed. And with a little help from someone, you can get there. Well, that was a good story. Little drink of water. And I shall look and see what other little story I can tell you. Well, that was a long story, wasn't it? Yes, here is another story. Now, this story is called The Secret Love of Freddie Frog. Now, I've got a little rhyme that my father, Angus Cameron Edmonston, he taught it to me when I was a little girl of 5, just after my mother had died when I was 5. And my sister Mary and I were taught it's a little rhyme. And it goes like this. Freddie the Frog was a very fine fellow. His chest was pale green and his back was pale yellow. He could swim like a fish and dive like a log. A very fine fellow was Freddie the Frog. Now Sammy the Swan had a large appetite, and as he was looking for dinner one night, he chanced to look under a slimy green stone, and who should he see there but Freddie the Frog. "Good evening," said Sammy. "I hope you'll agree you'll make a very fine supper for me." So he swallowed up Freddie from his toe to his head. And that is the end of the froggy called Fred. Now, when I told this little rhyme to my granddaughter Harriet, she burst into tears and said, "Granny, can't you make it end differently so that Freddie is not swallowed up by Sammy?" And I said to her, "Well, I'm afraid that's life, and I can't think of a different ending. But just think that Sammy had got to eat something, so Freddie was a nice morsel for Sammy that night." Anyway, I'm going to read you this story. I think I'll take my hat off now, as it's getting a bit hot, and the sun, no, it's shining a little bit. It doesn't matter what the weather's like outside, because it's shining here and it's shining in our hearts. So here I go, and Granny Grange will read you another story. This is called, again, The Secret Love of Freddie Frog. Oh. Freddie Frog was lazing back on a luscious green lily leaf in the Fraser's garden, thinking about how lucky he was. The pond was Freddie's home and was rather large for the size of garden, but it was Mr. Fraser's pride and joy. He tended it in all weathers, encouraging the water-tolerant plants to grow and prosper. He always had a good array of spectacular coloured lilies, all the colours you could think of, but his favourite was a pretty pink and yellow lily with dark green leaves. And this was also Freddie's sunbathing place, right in the middle of the biggest leaf. Life was good for Freddie. He had a large family, many brothers, sisters, cousins, aunts, great-aunts, uncles, great-uncles, and numerous other acquaintances amongst the pond life. He had plenty to eat. Insects were in abundance, his favourite dish being ant and spider pie, which his mother Frida often specially made for him. The only thing that was not right in his life was the one thing he wanted above all else: the love of Samantha, the regal swan, who floated around the lilies, occasionally a pecking at plankton, taking no notice of Freddie Frog whatsoever. One day Freddie plucked up enough courage to say, "Good evening, Samantha. How nice your white feathers look amongst the lilies." Samantha raised her long feathered neck and looked down at Freddie as if he were a mere speck of dirt on a lily flower. "I don't waste my time talking to nothing frogs," said Samantha disdainfully, gliding off to another part of the pond. After this encounter with Samantha, his secret love, Freddie felt very downcast and thought that his chances of impressing Samantha Swan was just about nil. Freddie was not about to give up, though, and something in him wanted to keep trying. Florence Frog, his sister, was quite concerned about Freddie, as for days he had been rather doleful and not his normal cheery self. "For goodness sake, Freddie, cheer up. Why go chasing after something you know you can't have? You know that Samantha Swan is completely out of your league. Why don't you ask Suzanne Fieldmaster to be your girlfriend?" "No, thank you," said Freddie. "I just want Samantha Swan to be my soulmate and friend for the rest of my life." Freddie then jumped from leaf to leaf until he was at the end of the pond, where he thought no one was about, and started to cry. Tears and tears flowed down his face. "Why can't Samantha Swan like me?" he tearfully muttered to himself. "All the other lady frogs think I'm a very handsome fellow, but probably all Samantha Swan thinks of me is something nice to eat for dinner." Actually, unbeknown to Freddie, Samantha had not entirely disliked Freddie. In fact, she had quietly admired his gleaming green body and been lost in admiration by his agility, jumping from leaf to leaf, something that she could never be able to do. Something very unusual happened to change the lives of Freddie Frog and Samantha Swan. A very unpleasant thunderstorm rent the air. Hailstones followed by torrential rain fell from the skies. The pond suddenly began to fill up, more and more, until it overflowed the sides. Mr. Fraser was marooned in his house, not able to get outside because of the heavy rain. He stared glumly from his kitchen window, which overlooked his large expanse of lawn, and then the pond, now full of lilies, frogs, various pond lice, and of course Samantha Swan and Gilbert Swan, Samantha's father. Mr. Fraser had made a little wooden shelter at one end of the pond for his beloved swans, and was quite relieved to see that they were sheltering from the terrible storm that continued into the night. At midnight Mr. Fraser was so worried that he pulled his heavy green Wellington boots on over his favourite spotty pyjama trouser legs, picked up his lantern, torch, and started to go down the garden to check on the state of the pond. He had only walked a few steps before he was aware that water was slurping round his Wellington boots. "Oh dear, said Mr. Fraser in a strained voice. "The pond is in flood. I shall never get to the far end to check on Samantha and Gilbert. Oh, I do hope they will be safe and not be swept away by the strong current of water that I can see has built up." "Hang in there, my swans," shouted Mr. Fraser. "The storm should not last too much longer." And with that he turned around, hoping against hope that the swans would be sensible and keep away from the treacherous currents, entered his house by the kitchen door, and sat down on the kitchen chair, unable to settle. Mrs. Fraser came downstairs and found Mr. Fraser slumped half asleep, his head on his arms on the kitchen table. Rufus, their black and white King Charles Spaniel, was sat on Mr. Fraser's feet, his faithful face trying to give comfort to his unhappy owner. "Come to bed, Charles," said Mrs. Fraser. "There's nothing you can do about the swans. They will be fine, they can swim well, and they have the little wooden house you built them to shelter in." I know, said Mr. Fraser, "but I do worry about them. I'm so fond of Samantha and Gilbert." Rufus gave a little bark of encouragement as Mr. Fraser rose wearily and mounted the stairs, followed by his wife, who had made a hot cup of comforting cocoa to help her husband fall asleep. In the early hours of the morning, the level of the water in the pond had risen alarmingly. The pond life was in chaos. The lilies, which had looked so beautiful, were now ruined and had floated out of the circle of the pond in a torrent of water. As the flooded pond turned into rapids, and frogs, goldfish, plankton, water snails were all washed out of their normal pond environment. What a disaster! Freddie Frog, who had been watching the water rise inch by inch as he crouched on his water lily leaf, knew just what to do. It was time for action to save all in the pond. First he swam to Frogsville, the leaf village in the centre of the pond, where all his family and acquaintances lived. He assembled everyone, shouting for them to assemble in the underwater Wriggleworm nightclub. Everyone was there, all the elders of the frog world, Freddie spoke into the lily microphone. Now then, fellow frogs, water snails, plankton and all pond life, we have to act quickly. The water is rising and we must take evasive action so we're not all swept away. We must all swim low in the bottom of the pond. In that way we will not be carried away by the current. Courage, everyone! Onwards and upwards! And with that, everyone clapped in appreciation of such a courageous leader, Freddie Frog, and then all swam to the bottom of the pond as instructed. Raymond Frog, who so admired Freddie's quick action, asked his old friend if he had seen Samantha Swan anywhere, knowing how fond Freddie was of the standoffish swan. Raymond just could not see what Freddie saw in such an unfriendly swan. Freddie said, "Look after everyone, Raymond. I'm going off to see that Samantha and her father are safe." Freddie knew that time was scarce and swam as fast as his legs would take him to where Samantha and Gilbert were sheltering side by side for warmth and comfort, at the point of considering their options, whether to swim out or stay put. At that moment Freddie arrived and hailed the pair. "Hello," said Freddie. "I hope you will agree to follow me to a safe part of the pond where there is no current. You will both be safe there, away from the terrible, dangerous rapids which could sweep you away." "Oh, thank you, Freddie. I've been so frightened," said Samantha. "You are so brave," she explained. "No time to talk," said Freddie in full command. "You must hurry, as the water is getting higher and higher and the current is affecting most of the pond with such very strong currents that we must be very careful." Without thinking of his own personal safety, Freddie swam ahead, showing the way to the calm, danger-free area of the pond. Gilbert Swan, a strong swimmer, reached safety first. Suddenly, Freddie heard Samantha calling out in trouble. I can't make it! I can't make it! The current is too strong!" Freddie immediately swam back to the struggling Samantha Swan. "Now listen to me, Samantha. You can make it. I'll be with you. I will swim beside you. You can and will make it to the safe part of the pond. It's not far now," said Freddie, with more confidence than he really felt, but he had to keep Samantha's spirits up. "Oh, all right," said Samantha, trembling with fear as her feathered body was buffeted by the out-of-control currents, trying to pull her away from safety. "I have faith in you, Freddie, but the current is so strong." I know," said Freddie, "but just keep your eyes on me. Do not look at the water. Keep looking at me and swim for your life." Both Freddie and Samantha swam the fastest they had ever swum, with Freddie shouting encouragement all the way. Gilbert was in front already, out of danger, so worried about his daughter, and when he saw Freddie Frog risking his own life to save his daughter, his opinion of frogs completely changed, and he was filled with admiration for this little frog's bravery, and decided there and then that he would never again look for a tasty frog dinner under a slimy green stone. Meanwhile, Freddie was swimming along beside Samantha Swan, willing her to swim on until suddenly the rough, dangerous water gave way to a part of the pond which had escaped the currents and was safe for the swans. "I can't thank you enough," said Gilbert Swan. "You have saved my daughter's life. Is there anything you would like in return?" "Well," said Freddie, "I would like your permission to ask Samantha to come out on a dinner date with me." There, he had asked the question he thought he would never get the chance to ever ask. "With a full, thankful heart, you have my permission," said a grateful Gilbert Swan. Samantha Swan bent her elegant neck to look at Freddie and said, "Freddie, I owe you my life. You are brave and courageous, and in my eyes you are the Prince of Frogs, and I would be honoured to go to dinner with you." The next day the flood water went down, and the pond returned to near normal. Mr. Fraser put his Wellington boots on again and rushed down the garden to check over the pond and his beloved swans. To his relief, Gilbert and Samantha were safe, Gilbert swimming happily at the end of the pond. Mr. Fraser then had to look twice. Was he imagining things? There was Samantha Swan with a lily flower round her neck, and in the water, perched on a luscious storm survivor lily leaf, he thought he saw a swan wearing a white shirt and red bow tie, sipping a glass of champagne. Mr. Fraser could not believe his eyes. What was that floating next to this bizarre image of a frog? A table made of twigs, silver candelabra with candles lit, a gourmet spider and ant pie, 2 large wine glasses, and a bottle of the best wine cooling in the pond water, a piece of string securing it to the table. Freddie and Samantha's dinner party. Mr. Fraser thought the storm must have upset his vision, and returned to the house scratching his head with a perplexed look on his face. Meanwhile, Samantha and Freddie had the best meal ever, and both promised each other that this would not be the last dinner that they would have together. Freddie's secret love was secret no longer, and he was the happiest frog ever. Well, that was a good story, wasn't it? That turned out well for everyone.